Welcome everyone to Pathways Through the Orchard. Tonight we'll be learning about Parshat Behar. This parsha is very unique in that virtually the entire portion is dealing with one set of laws, all surrounding the sabbatical year, the seventh year in Israel. It's only observed in Israel, where in ancient times, but even today, every seventh year, we rest all of our fields, all of our agriculture, all of the land, and we give the land its rest. It's called, in one place, it's called the Shabbat Haaretz, a rest for the land. Another place is called Shabbat Lashem, a Sabbath for God. So tonight we'll be discussing many different aspects of the Shmitah year. As I said, it only applies in Israel. And along with the laws of Shmitah, the seventh year, we also have a cycle of 7 times 7 years. And the 50th year is the Yovel year, which is called the jubilee year. It's a year of freedom where land reverts to its original owners. It's a completely different idea than the Western modern idea of ownership, where all land will revert to the original owners every 50 years, and indentured servants are set free. And like the sabbatical year, loans are canceled, and all of the produce of the seventh year becomes what's called hefker, ownerless, which is also goes totally against our modern concept of ownership. Here, a person can have hundreds of acres of whatever, apple trees, let's say, and during 6 years, it's his land. And he can make a profit off of the apples. But in the 7th year, all of the produce becomes ownerless. And in theory, anyone can come and take. So it's a very different concept altogether. And we know that one of the verses that explains this is God says, "You are sojourners with me because the land is mine." And even though we might have stewardship over it, and even quasi-ownership, ultimately, the land of Israel belongs to God, really the land in the whole world. It's just that this particular mitzvah only applies in Israel. So Rav Ginsburg points out that this is the 32nd Torah portion. 32. 32 equals lev, heart. And in one of the Living with the Times, I believe it will be posted on Thursday, I explain 7 different cycles of 7 in relating to time. 7 for days, weeks, months, years, years times years, millennium, and the final one is very symbolic, connected to the world to come. So all periods of time in Judaism, it's a divine cycle. It was set in creation. God created for 6 days, however we understand a day in this context. And on the 7th day, he rested. This was the first Shabbat, the Shabbat of creation. And this sets the tone this sets the cycle of all time. So hopefully on Thursday, everyone will tune in to Living with the Times as I go through 7 as relates to days, weeks, years, times years, and a total of 7 different cycles of 7 in time. So what's interesting is the 4th cycle, meaning the middle one, is if you have 7, the middle is number 4, is Shmitah. So it's the heart of all of the cycles of 7. And this is really true because similar to how an observant Jew arranges their whole life, our lifestyle is based around Shabbat. The whole week revolves around where are we going to be on Shabbat, when are we shopping, who are we inviting, who's inviting us. Everything revolves around Shabbat. In the bigger picture of how the Torah envisions a Jewish society, the Shmitah was the bigger context of the same cycle of 6 years we work the land, and the 7th year we rest the land. So this is like Shabbat, like 6 days of work and then Shabbat, but in a bigger context, and it obviously affects everyone. We know that the concept of a sabbatical year in relationship to universities, professors, this idea, you teach for 6 years, and the 7th year is a sabbatical. It doesn't mean you do nothing. It just means you're freed up to do research, to write, to produce on that level. And then other works also have it's not as applicable to other professions, but there are certain instances where a person will take a year off and make arrangements with the company to return after the year. So that's where the sabbatical year comes from. The whole concept is from this parsha of Shmitah. So it's the heart of the Jewish cycles of time. Rav Ginsburg points out that in the opening passage of this parsha, the word Shabbat, or in verb form, v'shavta means and you shall rest, appears exactly 7 times. Exactly 7 times in only a few verses. The opening passages, or actually passage about the Shemitah year, the word Shabbat is repeated 7 times. And so in the verb form, v'shavta means and you shall rest, and the land shall rest. If you permute the letters of v'shavta, it equals tshuva, the concept of return, repentance, tshuva. So how can we relate to this? Rav Ginsburg points out that in a sense, we need to do tshuva in our relationship to the land of Israel. That part of the whole concept of Shmitah, and we will get into this much, much deeper as we continue here, is to understand the deep connection between the Jewish people and the land of Israel. And keeping Shmitah is our way of recognizing acknowledging and honoring our love and connection to the land of Israel. So this is a tshuva, not so much with, hitting the heart, that kind of tshuva, but tshuva from the meaning of to return. Right now, the last approximately 140 years, the Jewish people are returning to Eretz Yisrael. That is what is happening. That's Vishavta, and you shall return. But the way it's spoken about in the parsha is that you shall give rest to the land. So this is just the introduction. For those who have Orchard of Delights, I write extensively about the sabbatical year and its purpose. Today, within a few hours, we are posting the Living of the Times for today, which will go into much more the different levels of understanding the sabbatical year. The literal meaning, the hinted or alluded meanings of the Shmitah year, the more allegorical, symbolic meaning, and the mystical meanings of Shmitah. We'll be touching on some of these, but as I mentioned many times, this whole series of pathways to the orchard is meant to reveal new insights that are not contained in Orchard of Delights and Fruits of the Delight and Fruits of Delight. Fruits of the Orchard, excuse me. So hopefully everyone has both of these books and can build on what I'm saying here. So now I want to bring an idea. I just want to show you. This is a book that came out during Shmitah, which is 2 years ago already, from Rav Ginsburg, which says, Vishavta ha'aretz, and the land shall rest. This is Rav Ginsburg's book about many, many different levels and ideas that are connected to the Shmitah year. It is not in English, it's only in Hebrew. I'm going to read later one of the passages, which it will be very, very important. But in this book, he explains it's a very, very Kabbalistic idea, which I'm going to explain and then try to explore what it means in our language. So he brings from the Arizal, how the Arizal talked about the Shmitah year. First, we need to go back to something that we've discussed many, many, many times, the idea that what is called Shvirat Kelim, the breaking of the vessels, that when God initially is creating the world, the initial lights were too great, too powerful for the immature vessels, and they shattered. And when they shattered, what happened is what we'll call a fall of the worlds. According to the Arizal, the Shvirat Kelim happened in Malchut of the world of Atzilut. According to Kabbalah, there are 4 worlds. The Arizal added a 5th world. So from above to below is Adam Kadmon, which is, we'll call it the channel through the program of creation is channeled through Adam Kadmon. And then the highest world is called Atzilut, the world of emanation. And in the world of emanation, in Malchut, the lowest of the Sfirot, is where metaphorically Shvirat HaKelim occurred. And when the vessels shattered, what happened is there was a fall of reality, a fall of the worlds. And through that fall, the next three levels came into being. So after Atzilut is the world of Bria, the world of creation. And then is the world of Yetzirah, of formation. And then the world of action, Asiyah. That is our material, physical world. As we go up the ladder of these Kabbalistic worlds, the more light there is and the less vessel, meaning the less materialism there is. So in the world of Atzilut, the light and vessel are almost synonymous. As we descend in the worlds, it becomes more and more material until we get to this world, which we have a plethora of vessels and relatively very little light. So this is just the background of what the Ari is going to teach, and as it applies to Shabbat and the soul and Shmitah. So the Ari says, just like there are 5 Kabbalistic worlds, we know that there are 5 levels of the soul. From this time, we'll go from below: the nefesh, the animal soul, the intuitive behavioristic aspect of a human being, ruach, the emotional, neshama, the intellectual, chaya, the surrounding superconscious, and yechidah, which is the actual point of godliness within the soul, within the human being. The Arizal says, and this is a very important idea, he says that at birth, we receive a nefesh and a ruach. We receive the animal soul, that's very, very attached to the body, and the rudiments of ruach, of the emotional aspect of a human being. But then the Ari says to merit neshama chaim yechida, we have to work for that. Now here, when we say the neshama is intellect, we're not talking about book knowledge. Someone could be the most brilliant person in the world, but not considered to be on the level of neshama. Here we're talking about a spiritually mature consciousness of true wisdom. So the Ari says we have 2 of the components of the soul. In potential, we have the other 3 also, and they're there, but to truly integrate them, we have to do a lot of work. So the Ari says this sets a paradigm of what's called rising up 3 levels. In other words, the 3 lower worlds all need to rise up to higher levels within the worlds. Now, this is what's called one of the secrets of Shabbat, the idea that we have 3 meals on Shabbat. We're told that Shabbat is divided into 3 periods of time. There's Friday night, Shabbos day, and then the afternoon and the 3rd meal. And the Ari says that what is happening on Shabbat is what's called the elevation of worlds, elevation of consciousness. And so this is the idea of getting an extra level of soul, a neshama yetera. So here we see the word neshama, that on Shabbat, God gives us this gift of contacting this level of neshama. But of course, we have to then integrate it and make it part of ourselves. So on Shabbat, the Ari says the whole secret of why Shabbat is so elevated, so spiritual, so holy is because all the worlds are rising up. And it is symbolized by the 3 meals of Shabbat. And that's why the third meal of Shabbat is considered the highest point of Shabbat, even though many of us relate to Friday night. Reb Shlomo used to say something very simple, but very deep. He said, Friday night energy, excuse me, is high. Third meal energy is deep. And you can see by the songs that we sing, Friday night is get up and dance, lively, joyful, ecstatic. Third meal is the nigunim are very, very deep, usually slow. Some of them border on melancholy, but they're heartfelt. And so on Shabbos, we rise up 3 levels because all the worlds need to rise up 3 levels. So then the Ari says the following. Shmitah is called a Shabbat for the land and a Shabbat to God. It's based on a cycle of 7. It has to do with resting, just like we don't do 39 main categories of work on Shabbat. Also, on Shmitah, we rest the land. We have to remember, ancient Israel was by far, most of the people lived on the land. It was an agrarian society. So to rest the land affected the entire country fundamentally. It wasn't like a professor at a university taking a sabbatical year. Here, the whole land rests. The whole economy is based on the sabbatical year. So now the Arizal says the following. He says that the nature of Shabbat is that the elevations are practically infinite. So let's look at the sfirot quickly. The sfirot are divided basically into 3 groups. We're going to start from below. You have the behavioristic, intuitive levels of the soul, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and Malchut. Then you have the emotional. This is following the levels of the soul. That's the level of the nefesh. The ruach is the emotional sfirot, or the more emotional, chesed, gevurah, and teferet. Then we go up 1 more level to the intellect, chachma, bina, and dat, or keter, chachma, and bina. So the Arizal says that what happens on Shabbat, and part of what's called the fixing of the world and the fixing of the soul, is that each group of sfirot need to rise up to the level above itself. Meaning that the behavioristic aspects of a human being need to rise up to the more emotional. And then the more emotional need to rise up to the more intellectual. So that's only two. But then the intellectual rises up to the lowest level of the world above it. And this can continue almost infinitely. And so the Arizal says that that's what's happening on Shabbat. And one of the hints to this is that the numerical value of Shabbat, this is something we've learned before, is 702. That number, when reversed, is 207. 207 is the word light, but it's also the word Ein Sof, infinite, without end. This is a secret of women ushering in Shabbat by lighting candles, and that we accompany Shabbat at its end through the Havdalah ritual, also with light. Shabbat is, that's what we say, Shabbat is 1/60th of the world to come. It has an infinite aspect to it. That's why the experiences on Shabbat sometimes touch this eternal, infinite place that in theory we could get to any time. But there's no doubt there's something auspicious about the ruach, the spirit of Shabbat, that allows us to get in touch with infinity. Now the Arizal parallels what happens on Shmitah. And he said, again, it's very, very Kabbalistic, but he says that when we're talking about Shabbat, so the four lower sfirot, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and Malchut, all rise together to Chesed, Gevurah, and Tiferet. And then Chesed, Gevurah, and Tiferet rise up, and then Chachma, Bina, Dat rise up. But the Ari says, again, this is pure Kabbalistic terminology, says with Shmitah, Malchut is separate. Malchut is not intrinsically connected to Netzach, Hod, and Yesod. And so the result of this is, according to the Arizal, again in Kabbalistic terminology, is Shmitah only rises, I won't say only, we're talking about very high level, to Malchut of Atzilut. And it stops there. Not like Shabbat, which will continue to rise up. It stops at Malchut of Atzilut. Now, if we remember, this is where Shvirat HaKelim happened, in this place called Malchut of Atzilut. So let's try to translate now these Kabbalistic terminologies as far as relates to Shmitah. We already did it with Shabbat, the idea of the infinite aspect of Shabbat, of continually rising 3 levels. Because once you get past Atzilut, past Adam Kadmon, then we're going into what's called the essence of God. The essence of God is infinite. There's no end to the elevations that can occur. But what about Shmitah? What is the Arizal trying to teach us by saying that Shmitah only goes to Malchut of Atzilut? Here we can understand that what it's telling us is Malchut is the lowest of the Sfirot. And this has to do with the land. Malchut is the stage on which reality occurs. That's why when you look at the Sfirot, they're all funneled through Yesod into Malchut. Malchut sits alone. And everything is funneled into Malchut. Malchut is where everything is happening in the physical material world. On the sabbatical year, when we rest the land, we are getting in touch with Malchut. We're getting in touch with the playing field, the stage on which everything is happening. That's where Tikkun Olam needs to happen, in this physical material world. When I said before that Shmitah only rises to Malchut of Atzilut, so in a sense I corrected myself and said it's not only, it's like this is such a high level. And in a certain way, what the Ari is saying is that the fact that Shmitah only rises up to Malchut of Atzilut is saying that this kind of Shabbat is where we're drawing spirituality into physicality, which is also true on Shabbat. In the Zohar, Shabbat is called Yom de Nishmata, the day of the soul. Again, the word Nishmata, Neshama, an extra level of soul, Neshama Yetera. But when you think about it, so it's called the day of the soul. So one might think the way we would observe Shabbat would be in the most spiritual way we can think of. Maybe that's like Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur, we don't eat, we don't drink, we don't wear leather, we don't wash, no marital relations. And it's called Shabbat Shabbaton. It has an aspect of Shabbat. So we would think that every Shabbat should be purely spiritual. But how do we observe Shabbat? We have 3 meals. We eat the best food. We have the best drink. We hang around the table and sing and discuss. We usually sleep more than we do during the week. We take a nap on Shabbat. You know, the acronym for Shabbat is Shena B'Shabbat Ta'anug. The 3 letters of Shabbat are Shena B'Shabbat Ta'anug. Sleep on Shabbat is a pleasure. It's a time of marital relations. We sing, we walk slower than we usually do. The point is that we actually keep Shabbat in a very physical way. This is one of the secrets of Shabbat, of drawing spirituality into physicality. Here we see 2 dynamics happening at the same time. On one hand, there's infinite elevations on Shabbat, higher and higher and higher and higher. But at the same time, we're drawing down spirituality into the physical. That's why we learned from all the Hasidic rabbis when they would eat, and many people do this, I do this, that every few bitefuls, I try to say, L'kavod Shabbos Kodesh, for the sake of the holy Shabbat. Meaning that my eating should be transformed into a spiritual exercise, a spiritual action. It's very physical, but at the same time, it becomes very spiritual. But Shmitah is slightly different because it's all connected to the land. And that very soon we're going to get into. This idea of the importance of the land, of resting the land, of drawing spiritually, not just for one day, but for a whole year, that we are trying to get in touch with a whole other relationship with the land and nature. We can do this anytime, but the Torah is mandating an entire year of a very different relationship to the land of Israel. So let's delve into that right now. So I'm going to read it in Hebrew and English from this book that I showed you before from Rav Ginsburg. Just one second. I see there we go. Okay, so I'm just reading one passage, but we're going to build on this passage. And in a sense, for those of you who have this already, my newest book, Life, Soul, and Consciousness Within All Creation, is an expansion of this short paragraph that we're going to read right now. Okay, so here it goes in Hebrew, and then I'll translate. Kodem kol, haparsha potachat, ki tavo el haaretz asher ani noten lachem, v'shavta haaretz Shabbat lashem. First of all, this Torah portion opens with the following words. When you come into the land, this is God speaking. When you come into the land that I will give you, you will give the land its rest, a Shabbat to God. Mani shomea kan. Rav Ginsburg says, what do I hear from this? What is this telling us? She'aretz atzma shovetet. That the land itself rests. Then he asks a question. Mi shovet. When we talk about rest, who does that apply to? What does that apply to? If you're saying that someone or something is resting, what does that relate to? Harei devar domem she'enu chai lo shovet. He says that something that is silent. Domem means silent. In Hebrew, the mineral kingdom is called domem, silent. We call it the mineral kingdom. But in Hebrew, it's called the silent kingdom. She'eno chai. The land is, I'm sorry, when it says who rests, so he says not something that's domem, that she'eno chai has no life, lo shovet, that it doesn't apply the idea of rest. Raka mashu chai efshar lomar shehu shovet. Only something that we consider alive can you talk about it resting. V'lo stam chai ela bal regesh. But here we're not talking about just ordinary life, but something that has ruach, like we said before from the Arizal, that we are given nefesh and ruach. But as soon as it's written, V'shavta haaretz Shabbat lashem, as soon as we read that it says, and the land will rest a Shabbat to God, zu ha hityachasut lepnimiyut shel haaretz. This is relating to the most inner dimension of the land. Hakara v'hargasha sha'oretz hi nefesh chaya. This is a understanding, an acknowledgement and feeling that the land is a living being. Efshar afilu lomar sha'oretz hi adam. One could even say that the land, and here is specifically talking about the land of Israel, is called Adam. It's called a human being. How do we know this? Because it says about Israel, Al Yisrael Katuv Atem Kruim Adam. Because there's a verse that says, you are called Adam. So the Gemara says this is referring to Israel. The Gama Aretz Hi Yisrael, Eretz Yisrael. And also the land is called Israel, Eretz Yisrael. So that relates to the land as being a living being. So when it comes to the sabbatical year, the first thing that we have to realize is that when we're not working the land, then we can come to appreciate how much the land is actually alive. Just like a person, excuse me, needs a day of rest, likewise, the land needs its rest, and that's what it means when it says Shanat Shabbaton Yel Ortz. A complete rest will be for the land. So here Rav Ginsburg brings the idea that there is life in the land. It's a living being. So that's what we're going to do now. We're going to explore what does that mean exactly, that the land is a living being. Again, as I said, most of what I'm going to say now is contained in this book. I'm doing it in super quick form, and I'm only relating here to the mineral world and the land itself. Here, I'm not dealing with soul and consciousness and life in the plant world, in the animal world, and the human world. Here, we're just dealing with what's called the mineral world, the domem. So this is obviously the least understood of, if we're talking about life, soul, and consciousness, we can understand, and the book brings from a scientific point of view as well as a Kabbalistic point of view, how there is soul and consciousness in the plant world, the animal world, and the human world. But when we talk about the land and stones and mountains and rivers, it's much harder to understand initially where is the life and the soul and the consciousness. First of all, we now know that all matter is energy. So this already is a game changer. We've known this for approximately 100 years. E equals mc squared, that all matter is energy. And so when we look at the mineral world, and it appears to be static, it appears to be silent, but it is pure energy, frenetic energy. And that's why only a little bit of energy can be transformed into phenomenal amounts of energy. This is, of course, the secret of nuclear energy. That's how it works, that you only need a small amount, of matter. You only need a small amount of matter, but that can be transformed when developing or revealing the power of the energy within the matter. And so this already dispels the idea that the mineral world is static. It is moving, and in that sense, it's alive. Our premise is that nothing can exist that does not have a spark of godliness that was put into all of creation, every level of creation, through creation. Nothing can exist if it's not animated by God. That's what we say every day. That God in his great goodness renews the work of creation every single day. And we learn that it's not just every day, it's every split second. And now science tells us every billionth of a second, particles are coming in and out of existence within every atom. There's a constant flow of life force that allows the world to exist. This is what is spoken about in Perek Shira. Perek Shira is this seeming whimsical midrash about how every creation has its song, and what the song is of the sun and the moon and the stars and the rivers and the mountains and the wheat fields and the barley fields and the trees and the animals and the insects. It goes through creation, and each creation has its song. So, but here we learn on a deep level is that all of creation has a certain level of consciousness. Now, first, we just said that everything has life force, it's divine life force that allows it to exist. But where do we see that matter has consciousness? So that science has also shown, even though it's enigmatic, it's mysterious, and science barely understands it. But I'm just mentioning two of the tests. One is called the double slit test, where they send photons through two slits and have a screen behind it. And this is how they proved that light is both a wave and a particle, that they're individual particles of photons. That's what light is. Individual photons, which create a stream that we call light. But at the same time, it has properties of a wave. So when you send individual photons through these two slits, so one would imagine that they would all hit the screen in the same place. They're going through the same slit, being sent in the same way. But in a total paradoxical mystery, when you look on the screen, it creates a wave form, meaning each individual photon is somewhat aware of what the preceding photons, where they landed on the screen. And they will, we use the word, work together to form a wave pattern. It's beyond our capability right now to really understand. We know that light is both a particle and a wave, but it's considered a paradox that we don't really understand how that can be. There's another experiment called the Einstein-Rosen-Podolsky test, where they took individual photons or electrons, and they separated them at great distances. And if they would do something, in the beginning, they are connected. So no matter how much the distance is between them, if some action is taken on a particle over here, the particle over here will react in conjunction with it. Again, it's baffling, and it's really beyond our total understanding. What kind of consciousness is that? How is that happening? So again, we're defining soul and consciousness in a very broad manner, but it appears that individual particles are making decisions, are connected to the other particles. They're aware of them, and they act in conjunction. When we get to the vegetable world, the animal world, and the human world, it just gets clearer and clearer. The vegetable world, still, there's much experimentation that has to be done, but many biologists have come to the conclusion that plants have consciousness and make decisions and can even plan for the future, can communicate with other plants. But here we're just talking about the land. When we talk about the land, there's a number of different words that we can use. One is Adama, which is the word for Adam with a hey at the end. The hey at the end makes it a feminine word. So Adama is feminine. And this is very connected to, not just in Judaism, but almost worldwide, the idea of relating to the earth as Mother Earth. Why? Because it's a nurturing energy. It brings life. Just like women give birth, the land allows the vegetable kingdom to exist, as we'll see in a second. So Adam and Adama is just telling us in the Hebrew language the deep connection between the land and the human being. In our case, especially because the Shmitah relates to the land of Israel, between the people of Israel and the land of Israel. Then we have another word, is Eretz. There's another word, Eretz Yisrael. The Gemara says, why is it called Eretz? If you look at the second two letters, is Resh Tzadi, is the word Ratz, run. So the Gemara says it's called Eretz because it's running to do the will of God. What's connected to the will of God? The word for will is Ratzon, which begins with Ratz, Ratzon. So it's called Eretz because it's running to do the will of God. Just like Rav Ginsburg said, we don't talk about something resting if it doesn't have life. So the same thing, how can the land run to do the will of God if it doesn't have some essence of consciousness, of God's life force animating it? And then we have what's called afar, dust. And in the Torah, we're told that the human being is created, that God took from the dust of the earth, and he blew into it, and he formed the body of man and blew into it nishmat chayim, the soul of life. And man became a living being. Nefesh chaya. So here we have a third word, afar. And that's why we get this idea of from the dust you came, and to the dust you return. That's why the importance in Jewish tradition of burial in the earth, because we come from the earth. So that's the connection, is that our being is coming from what's called afar. Now, Rav Ginsburg has another book called The Breath of Life. And it's actually a book on evolution, and like dissecting secular evolution and finding which parts of it are what we call kosher, that do not run against any concept of Torah, and others that do. And in this, he says the following. There's this idea that human beings come from a common ancestor. Well, for us, it's clear, Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve. There's this idea of a common ancestor to humanity. Rav Ginsburg says on a deep level, the common ancestor of all creation is afar, is dust. And that's why poetically we have this idea. I remember the song Woodstock. We are stardust, we are golden, and we have to get back to the garden. If you remember Joni Mitchell's song, we are stardust, we are golden, and we have to get back to the garden. It's very poetic, but we're actually told by science that we are stardust, that life on Earth is a product of stars exploding throughout however long creation is, and spewing the elements that make all life possible. So Rav Ginsburg was saying, afar here, we don't mean literally the dust of the earth. That is a manifestation. But here we're talking about afar as call it the basic building blocks of creation on a physical level. On a spiritual level, we say that the Hebrew letters and the sphirot are the building blocks of creation. So now let's connect it to the land itself, because that's what we want to understand about Shmitah. In the Torah, a number of times when God is warning us, don't follow the ways of the nations that preceded you in the land, and connected to murder and adultery and idol worship and all kinds of magical practices. And the Torah says that the land cannot stomach these kinds of sins. And if Israel does these things, the land will vomit you out. And what's important is that the way it's written, it doesn't say God will exile you. God will throw you out. You will be caused to leave. It says, I believe 2 different times, that the land will vomit you out, because the land has a sensibility. The land has a soul, however we can understand that. And that when certain acts are done, especially spilling blood for no reason, this goes back to when Cain kills Abel. And it says in the Torah that the blood is crying out from the earth. So the land has a soul. That's why we have to give it its rest. Because as we read before, what Rav Ginsburg was saying, and not just Rav Ginsburg, that the soul has a sensibility, and we have to treat it in the proper way. So what is it exactly about the earth that we talk about life and soul and consciousness? In Hebrew, the earth has what's called koach hatzomeach, the power of growth. And on a very practical level, you put a seed in the ground and you cover it up, and either through the rain or you give it some water, it grows. If you would take that seed and just put it on a table outside, it will not sprout. It will not grow. It needs to be in the ground to grow. Now they have ways of growing in just water, but this is a whole discussion also, that water also has what's called the power of growth. These two things, and both of them are from the mineral world. Both of them are considered, at least till recently, lifeless, soulless, consciousness-less. But you put a seed in the ground with water and it will grow. But the power of growth is in the land. The potential is in the seed. But without the earth and the water, it won't grow. It can't grow. So let's just kind of bring this together, that the Shmitah year, the sabbatical year, just like every mitzvah is trying to teach us something. And it's not for just that moment. Let's say the holidays. This past Torah portion went through all of the holidays. Every holiday has, we're going to call it a theme, something we're supposed to learn from it, connect to, integrate, grow from. But it's not just for the holiday. Let's say Pesach. Pesach was the most recent. So this is the holiday of freedom. This is when we became a nation. The idea of connecting to our history. The idea of going from slavery to freedom. All these different themes. But it's not just for those 7 days. During that holiday, we're supposed to experience all of these things and then integrate it so it becomes a part of us. Shavuos has a different theme. Sukkot has a different theme. Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. But this is about the holidays, but other mitzvot also. When we have a mitzvah, it's there to teach us, but not just for the moment that we're doing that mitzvah. So the Shmitah year, the sabbatical year, is trying to teach us our relationship to the land, our relationship to nature, our relationship to creation. And as we said before, like God says, you are sojourners with me. The land is mine. Shmitah is the time that we are to get in contact with these different ideas. But also, like Shabbat, there's an experience involved here. After 6 days of working very, very hard, dealing with the material, physical challenges of this world, Shabbat comes and gives us rest and gives us a chance to get in touch with our own soul, to get in touch with God, to get in touch with other people, with the Torah. So here we have Shmitah, but on a bigger context, that it is designed to renew ourselves, give us a chance. It's like a sabbatical year for a professor. gives the professor a chance after teaching for 6 years and maybe getting a little burnt out and not having the time to develop his or her ideas further and to bring them into the world. The same thing with Shmitah. By giving the land its rest, it's giving us rest. It's not like Shabbat that other works are forbidden, but it does give us an opening to experience life in a very, very different way. A whole year off of very, very hard work of working the land. We should be blessed. We're told actually that it took a lot of faith to keep the Shmitah year. It was not an easy mitzvah, as you can imagine. The whole economy is based on the land, on agriculture. And then to be told to give the land its rest. Listen, many people can't even deal with keeping Shabbat for one day because it might interfere with someone running their business or profits or whatever. But a whole year, it took a lot of faith. But we need that kind of faith because this is something I didn't bring out, but we're told that there's a tradition that Mashiach will come right after the Shmitah year. And the reason is that it's Malchut. We call Mashiach the Melech HaMashiach, the King Messiah. Melech HaMashiach. And so the Shmitah year is all about Malchut, all about bringing it down to the earth and uniting, just like a regular Shabbat, spiritual and physical. And the idea is after keeping a Shmitah year, the energy is right that Mashiach should come. It would be fitting, appropriate for all of Israel to keep Shmitah. It would bring the Mashiach. It would draw that energy in the world. So may we all merit to experience this time where we can unite spiritual, physical, and help draw the Mashiach into the world.